In educational circles over recent years, there's been lots of discussion around a growth versus a fixed mindset. And while we know these terms, we often understand that the work of Carol Dweck and some of her research team initially in formulating these concepts, I find that often there's not a lot of clarity with educators as to what these mindsets mean, what the terms actually represent, how you know whether you've got a fixed versus a growth mindset, and more importantly, why does it even matter? And so let's just quickly define these two things. So a fixed mindset, broadly speaking, is a mindset which says that capacity, potential, skill is largely inbuilt. This idea that you can do something or you can't do something. It is fixed, and therefore don't bother trying to do stuff you can't do because that's just not your thing. Whereas a growth mindset is essentially a mindset which says that when you can't do something, you can actually improve or increase your capacity, your skill, your potential with intentional effort. And so the important thing, of course, is each of us is a mix of a growth and a fixed mindset. How would you know if not just you, but the students you're teaching have a growth versus a fixed mindset? And again, then, what is the impact of that? So if you look at the work of Carol Dweck and others, there are some common characteristics or hallmarks of both these mindsets. The hallmarks of a fixed mindset are ones like this. People with a fixed mindset often are incredibly competitive. There's this sense of needing to prove yourself over and over again because the assumption is if you've only got a fixed amount of intelligence, then you better prove that you've got a good dose, a good healthy dose. And often this competition and comparison leads to stopping. In other words, if I can do better than everyone else once I've arrived, once I'm the top of the pile or ahead of the pack, then I can chill out, I can relax. The second thing we see is often people with a fixed mindset will seek low-threat relationships. There's a compulsion to surround yourself with people who will make you feel good about yourself and avoid those who could make you feel challenged or threatened. Number three, people with a fixed mindset tend to avoid risks and challenges because things that go wrong may reveal that maybe you're not good enough. And therefore, you often see people with a fixed mindset not even attempt things if they know they can't succeed easily at them the first time. The next key hallmark or characteristic is important. Often people with a fixed mindset see performance as identity. In other words, when I succeed, it's a result of my talent, therefore I am better, I am more valuable as a result. This can easily become superiority in people with a fixed mindset. However, and this is where it gets dangerous, when failure is experienced, often this is a massive hit to confidence. You tend to see people with a fixed mindset, if they've attached their identity to their performance, when things don't go well, the spiral of shame can be very sharp, very profound. And so you often see this connection between performance and identity as a hallmark that is incredibly concerning. The next characteristic is apathy or disinterest. If it's all about ego preservation, which it typically is with people with a fixed mindset, they will appear not to care, but not because they're actually not disengaged or not because they don't care, but it's a protection tactic. And last one, you tend to see people with a fixed mindset are focused on external validation. There's this sense of, am I okay? Am I doing well? Am I doing better than others? Again, we see that competitive streak often come in. Now, in comparison, a growth mindset tends to be characterized by a very different, often opposite set of behaviors or expectations. Typically, you'll see in a growth mindset things like this. There's often less of a need to prove yourself. And there's this notion that, essentially you're a work in progress. So why bother wasting time over and over again proving yourself when you could be spending that energy getting better? The other great thing too about this assumption is there's a base level idea that talent is not a scarce resource. And so if someone can do something better than you, that's okay. Number two, people with a growth mindset tend to seek relationships that challenge. There's less of a reliance on friends or partners who will shore up that sense of self-esteem, but more of a desire to have people around you who will challenge you, who will stretch you. Number three, people with a growth mindset tend to see failure as a learning opportunity. In other words, failure is not the person, it's the experience. It's not an identity that they assume. And they tend to also see failure as a signal to try harder or innovate rather than a signal that they should give up or move on to something else. Failure, therefore, is a learning opportunity. Number four, people with a growth mindset are often motivated by the stretch. They won't readily label themselves or throw their hands up in the air in despair when things go wrong or they fail the exam. But by the same token, when success is experienced, they tend to see this as a signal to keep going and keep developing. There's this notion that they've never actually arrived. And the last one, they tend to look for less validation externally. They don't see success as a measure of their worth, or as making them better than others when they've succeeded or worse than others when they have failed. Now, this last point is critical. The value of having a growth mindset in seeing you derive far more of your value and sense of worth intrinsically rather than extrinsically is absolutely critical. This is what psychologists call an internal locus of control versus an external locus of control. In other words, I'll apply myself, not because I want to appear better than others or get the applause or the award, but just because when I do well and overcome the odds and grow, there's that sense of pride in my work. I feel like I'm making progress. Increasingly, the world will be dominated by a workplace where people are self-employed, they're freelancers, they're entrepreneurs, not working in large organizations the way that people have for at least the last 100 years. And so the challenge is, of course, when you're in an environment where you're not working in a large organization where someone's going to be patting you on the back, setting goals, micromanaging you, you've got to be self-directed. You've got to have that sense of internal drive and motivation. But even those who do have jobs in the years ahead will still need to have a whole lot more of these growth mindset characteristics. I was reading a very interesting report recently, and in the report, an Apple store manager was interviewed. And he said something that was very interesting. He said, any employee who needs to be managed in future will no longer be employable. Isn't that an interesting concept? This idea that in the years ahead, even if you've got a job, if you need to be managed, if you're not self-directed, self-motivated, don't have that bent toward wanting to grow and challenge yourself and change, you're not even going to be someone who's capable of having a traditional job. Interesting insight from a political theorist named Benjamin Barber. He said this, he said, I don't divide the world into the weak and the strong, the successes and the failures. He said, I divide the world into the learners and the non-learners. And therein lies the most important point. We are entering an age where constantly upskilling, challenging yourself, doing things that are outside your comfort zone will be critical. Having one set of skills and then stopping there will see any of us in the years ahead vulnerable to being less relevant in the labour market. A growth mindset will be absolutely vital. Our challenge as educators is how do we make sure that we are building a growth mindset in students, because it is the very mindset that will allow them to be equipped for the future ahead.